20 years old. Let that number sit for a moment. 20 years old is when most men are still figuring out who they are. Still making mistakes they'll spend the next decade trying to fix. Still learning, still watching, still waiting for someone to hand them something that resembles authority. Bajirao Peshwa was 20 years old when he walked into one of the most volatile political arenas in 18th century Asia and said, essentially, "I'll take it from here." And the terrifying thing, the thing that his enemies and even some of his allies never quite got over, is that he meant it completely. No performance. No bluster. Just a young man with an absolute, bone-deep certainty that he was the right person for the job, combined with the intelligence and the will to prove it. Within a decade, no one was arguing anymore. This is the story of how Bajirao seized power, consolidated it, and turned a position that could have been ceremonial into the most dangerous office in India. April 1720. Balaji Vishwanath is dead. The first hereditary Peshwa of the Maratha Confederacy, the man who had spent 20 years building the office of Prime Minister from a largely administrative role into something with genuine military and political teeth, is gone. Not dramatically. Not in battle. Just gone the way men went in that era, worn down by years of relentless work until the body simply stopped. He left behind a confederacy that was powerful but fragile. The revenue system he had negotiated, the chauth, the right to collect tribute from large portions of the Deccan, was established but contested. The relationship with Chhatrapati Shahu Maharaj, the Maratha king, was stable but dependent on personal trust rather than institutional structure. The various military commanders and regional chiefs who made up the Maratha power structure were loyal, but loyalty in the 18th century was a commodity that moved with power, not with sentiment. And now the man who had held all of this together was dead. The court gathered. The factions emerged immediately, the way factions always do when power is suddenly in play. There were men in that court who had spent decades building their own influence, their own networks, their own quiet claims to authority. Men who had tolerated Balaji Vishwanath's dominance because he had the king's trust and the results to justify it. Men who had been waiting, consciously or not, for exactly this kind of opening. And then Bajirao stood up. He was not the tallest man in the room. He was not the oldest or the most decorated. He had no battles to his name, no campaigns that anyone could point to and say, "There, that is why we should follow him." What he had was something harder to quantify and much harder to argue against. He had clarity. While everyone else in that room was calculating angles and running political scenarios, Bajirao had already done that calculation and arrived at a conclusion. He knew what the Maratha Confederacy needed. He knew what he was capable of. And he knew, with a certainty that came across not as arrogance but as simple, settled fact, that he was the right person to lead it. He made his case directly to Chhatrapati Shahu. The speech, as recorded in various accounts, some of them admittedly written after the fact with the benefit of knowing how the story ended, was not about his lineage or his father's legacy. It was about strategy. About opportunity. About the rotting Mughal Empire and the window that was opening right now that would not stay open forever. About what the Marathas could become if they moved boldly instead of defensively. He reportedly said something to the effect of, "The time for consolidating what we have is over. The time for expansion is now. Give me this position and I will make the Maratha name feared from the Deccan to the Indus." Shah gave him the position. It was one of the most consequential personnel decisions in Indian history. The appointment was not popular. That needs to be said clearly because the version of this story that gets told after the fact, after Bajirao's record is established and his genius is undeniable, tends to smooth over how much resistance there was at the beginning. How many powerful, experienced, genuinely capable people looked at this 20-year-old and saw not a future legend but a liability. Shripad Rao Natu, one of the senior figures in the Maratha court, was openly opposed. He was not a fool or a petty man. His concern was legitimate. The Peshwa's office was not an honorary position. It carried real responsibility for real armies in a real political environment where mistakes had consequences measured in lives and territory. Handing it to a 20-year-old, regardless of his lineage or his evident intelligence, was a gamble. Other senior figures were more quietly skeptical. They smiled, they bowed, they offered their formal congratulations. And then they went back to their own courts and their own networks and they waited. Because in their experience, and they had a great deal of it, youth and ambition almost always ran into the wall of reality eventually. The question was not whether Bajirao would fail but when. Bajirao was aware of all of this. He was not naive about court politics. He had grown up inside them, watching his father navigate exactly this kind of environment for his entire childhood. He understood that the men around him were measuring him constantly, looking for cracks, ready to exploit any sign of weakness or error. His response was not to seek their approval. It was to make their approval irrelevant. He moved immediately, before the skeptics had time to organize, before the factions had time to coalesce around an alternative, before the doubt had time to harden into opposition. He threw himself into the administrative work of the Peshwa's office with a ferocity that surprised people who had expected him to spend his first months consolidating political relationships. He audited the revenue collection system. He identified commanders who were siphoning off resources and replaced them. He personally read the correspondence that had been accumulating for months, the reports from regional commanders, the complaints from village administrators, the diplomatic communications from neighboring powers, and he responded to all of it quickly and specifically, in ways that demonstrated he had actually read and understood what he was responding to. This sounds basic. It was not. The Peshwa's office had accumulated habits of delegation and delay that were, by 1720, deeply entrenched. Bajirao cut through them with the impatience of a young man who could not understand why things that seemed obvious were being treated as complicated. Within 6 months, the office ran faster and leaner than it had in years. The quiet skeptics started paying closer attention. Bajirao understood something about power that many of his contemporaries missed. Political authority without military capability is theater. You can have the title, the office, the formal deference of every person in the room, and if you cannot back it with force when force is required, all of it dissolves the moment someone decides to test it. He was determined that no one would ever successfully test it. He spent the first year of his Peshwaship doing something that looked, from the outside, like administrative work but was actually the construction of a military machine. He studied the Maratha cavalry, its strengths, its weaknesses, the specific capabilities of different commanders and their units. He identified the gaps. Where were they slow? Where were they predictable? Where did their logistics fail them on extended campaigns? And then he started fixing those gaps systematically, with the same methodical energy he brought to everything else. The Maratha military tradition that he inherited was already formidable. It was built around light cavalry, fast, mobile, devastating in open terrain, impossible to pin down and destroy in the kind of set-piece battle that heavier armies preferred. Shivaji had developed these tactics, and the Marathas had been using and refining them for 50 years. Bajirao took that foundation and pushed it further than it had ever gone. His obsession was speed. Not just the speed of individual cavalry units, but the speed of the entire army as a system. The command decisions, the supply arrangements, the intelligence gathering, the coordination between different units operating simultaneously across large distances. He wanted an army that could think fast, not just move fast. He created what amounted to a permanent rapid response force, a corps of cavalry units that traveled light, lived off the land rather than depending on supply wagons, and could cover ground at a pace that no conventional army of the period could match. These were not untrained raiders. They were disciplined, well-commanded, and capable of precise coordinated action. They just happened to also be able to appear somewhere that, by any rational calculation of distances and timelines, they should not have been able to reach yet. He drilled them. Personally, repeatedly, obsessively. The commanders who served under him in this period describe a man who never seemed to sleep, who was always either reviewing intelligence, planning routes, or on horseback with his troops. The energy was extraordinary even by the standards of young men, and it set a tone for the entire force. If the Peshwa himself was working at this intensity, there was no basis for anyone else to be doing less. By 1722, 2 years into his tenure, Bajirao had an army that was meaningfully different from what he had inherited. Not larger. Numbers were not the point. Different in quality, in speed, in the range of operations it could sustain. He was ready to use it. Military capability without political intelligence is just violence. Bajirao had watched his father long enough to understand that the battlefield was only one of the arenas where power was won and lost. The political landscape he was navigating in the early 1720s was extraordinarily complex. Within the Maratha Confederacy itself, power was not centralized. It never really had been. The Confederacy was exactly what the name implied, a coalition of different chieftains, regional powers, and military commanders who were united by a shared identity and a shared king but who maintained their own interests, their own agendas, their own ambitions. Managing this coalition, keeping it pointed in the same direction without allowing any single faction to become powerful enough to challenge the central authority, was a constant, never-finished task. Bajirao approached this with a combination of tactics that became his political signature. He was generous with credit and recognition for commanders who performed well, making sure that victories were celebrated in ways that honored the men who had executed them rather than claiming all the glory for himself. This was not false modesty, It was the intelligent management of men who needed to feel valued in order to remain loyal. He was ruthless with commanders who failed or who prioritized their own interests over the Confederacy's. Not dramatically ruthless, no theatrical punishments, no public humiliations. Just a quiet, consistent pattern of reduced responsibility and reduced access, until the man in question understood that his influence had contracted and that the contraction was permanent unless his behavior changed. And he maintained an absolute, unswerving loyalty to Chhatrapati Shahu that went beyond political calculation into something that looked genuinely personal. Shahu was the king. Bajirao was the Peshwa. The relationship between them was, by the standards of the time, unusually close. Shahu consulted Bajirao on decisions that went beyond the Peshwa's formal responsibilities, and Bajirao deferred to Shahu on matters where the king's authority was relevant even when Bajirao could have pushed his own position. This loyalty served Bajirao politically in ways that were not immediately obvious. It meant that his enemies could not drive a wedge between him and the king, and they tried repeatedly, because destabilizing the Peshwa-king relationship was the obvious path to weakening Bajirao's position. Every attempt failed. Shahu trusted Bajirao completely, and Bajirao never gave him a reason not to. Externally, the political situation was equally complex. The Mughal Empire was fragmenting. Regional powers were emerging. The Nizam in the south, the Nawabs of various northern territories, smaller rulers of every description carving out whatever space they could in the chaos. Some of these could be turned into allies or at least neutralized. Others were potential targets. All of them needed to be watched, assessed, and handled according to the specific combination of threat and opportunity they represented. Bajirao tracked all of this simultaneously. It is one of the genuinely remarkable qualities of the historical record around him. The volume of correspondence, the range of political relationships he managed personally, the number of different situations he was monitoring and responding to at any given time. He was not a man who delegated his thinking. He might delegate execution, but the strategic assessment, the fundamental question of what to do and why, he kept to himself. The early campaigns of Bajirao's tenure were not the legendary engagements that would define his career, but they mattered enormously because they were the crucible in which his reputation was first forged. In 1723, he led his first significant military operation, an intervention in a succession dispute among the smaller rulers of the Deccan that had created a power vacuum with implications for Maratha interests. The details of the dispute are less important than what the campaign revealed about Bajirao as a commander. He moved faster than anyone expected. His forces appeared at a location that his opponents had believed was safely distant from Maratha territory, and they did so before the opponent had completed their defensive preparations. The psychological impact was immediate. An enemy that expected to have weeks to prepare suddenly found itself confronting a fully operational Maratha force with no time to adjust. The engagement was brief. The outcome was exactly what Bajirao had planned. And he followed it immediately with a diplomatic settlement that consolidated the military victory into a lasting political arrangement, using the leverage of his demonstrated military capability to extract concessions that were worth more in the long run than any territorial gain from the battle itself. His commanders returned from that campaign different. They had expected to follow a young Peshwa who had read a lot of books about war. What they had experienced was something else. A commander who thought several moves ahead of everyone around him and who executed with a precision that left no room for doubt. Word spread, the way word always spreads in close military communities. The Peshwa was the real thing. In 1724, another test. A larger engagement, more complex terrain, an opponent with more resources. The result was the same. Not a lucky victory. Not a near-run thing that happened to go the right way. A clean, deliberate win that followed from decisions Bajirao had made days before the fighting started. By 1725, the doubters were not gone. Some men will doubt regardless of evidence, but they were quiet. The ones who had the intelligence to recognize what they were seeing had already updated their assessment. Shripad Rao Natu, the man who had been most openly opposed to Bajirao's appointment, was reportedly seen in conversation with a colleague around this time. The conversation, as recorded by a court observer, went roughly as follows. The colleague asked whether Nata still had reservations about the Peshwa. Nata said, and this is paraphrased from the source, that he had been wrong about the boy's readiness, but that he was no longer concerned about whether Bajirao could do the job. He was beginning to wonder whether anyone could control what Bajirao was becoming. That observation was more prescient than Nata probably intended. By the mid-1720s, Bajirao's strategic vision for the Maratha Confederacy had crystallized into something clear and specific. He believed, and he argued this openly, repeatedly, to Shahu and to the senior commanders around him, that the Maratha Confederacy had a window of historical opportunity that would not last indefinitely. The Mughal Empire was weakening. The regional powers that were emerging from its collapse were not yet established enough to be truly formidable. The political vacuum was real and large, and it would be filled by someone. Bajirao intended for that someone to be the Marathas. His vision was not defensive consolidation. It was not the careful management of existing territory. It was expansion, aggressive, sustained, strategically directed expansion that would push Maratha power north and west and eventually establish the Confederacy as the dominant force across the subcontinent. This was ambitious to the point that some of the men around him found it alarming. The Marathas were powerful in the Deccan. They had the Chauth rights, the military capability, the political legitimacy that came from being the primary successor to Shivaji's legacy. But the north? Delhi? The Mughal heartland? Bajirao's argument was characteristically direct. The Mughals are weak now. If we wait until they are weaker still, someone else will have already moved. The window is open. We go through it. He was not wrong. And he was not going to wait. The Nizam of Hyderabad was the first major obstacle, the most powerful regional force in the Deccan, a man with the resources, the experience, and the ambition to contest Maratha expansion southward and to complicate it in every other direction. Dealing with the Nizam was not optional. It was the prerequisite for everything else Bajirao wanted to do. He had been preparing for that confrontation since the first months of his Peshwaship. By 1727 he was ready. The Battle of Pakht was coming. And the world was about to learn what Bajirao Peshwa was truly capable of. In 7 years, the 20-year-old that nobody believed in had become the most consequential military and political figure in the Maratha Confederacy. He had built a machine, military, administrative, political, that was unlike anything the Marathas had operated before. He had silenced the doubters not with arguments but with results. And he had set his sights on a horizon that most of the men around him could not even see yet. The rise was complete. Now came the proof. In the next episode, we go to Pakht, the battle that humiliated one of the most powerful rulers in India and announced to the entire subcontinent that Bajirao Peshwa was not a regional concern. He was a continental one. If this story is hitting different, and I think it is, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to know this history. And tell me in the comments, what do you think it takes to be this certain of yourself at 20 years old? Because Bajirao had something most people never find.